Yes, just trying to get.
Hi, Steve. We ready? Okay, we're live. Welcome, everybody, to the staff meeting of Sedgwick County Commission and the Sedgwick County Departments. Today's September 14th. With that, I'll hand it over to Manager Tom Stoltz.
Good morning, Chairman. Good morning, Commission. We have two items for staff discussion this morning. The first item is a discussion about Capers 3, and we're very lucky this morning to have Alan Conroy, who is the Executive Director of Capers, with us in person. He came all the way from Topeka to address the Commission and answer questions about Capers. And House Representative Steve Johnson came all the way from Salina this morning as well, and I'm sure would be glad to answer questions or comment on this topic. So Alan has a PowerPoint to present. We'll start with that. And then the second item we'll discuss will be Tyler Technologies, and I'll get more into that when we get to that item. But let's go ahead and start with Alan and hear about Capers 3.
All right, welcome, Alan and Steve. Before you get started, I think Commissioner Howell would like to make an introductory statement.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to, number one, thank you for taking time to come to us in person. This is really quite an honor to have both of you here. I wanted to just share with everyone that I've known Mr. Conroy since my very beginning in the legislature. Back in the day, he was in charge of legislative research, and if you know, there's a lot of smart people up there in Topeka that can figure out how to manipulate data, make data, present data, all kinds of different ways, and he would present the budget to the legislators early in the session, and one of the smartest people in Topeka, I think, is Alan Conroy. So the fact he moved over to Capers is a loss for the legislature, but it's good to have someone who's so smart in charge of our state Capers program. I mean, it's a really important part of our benefits that we offer to employees. But I also want to say, I know that when Alan truly is an expert on these topics, and so I'm just glad to have that personal reference. And then for Stephen Johnson, Stephen and I were both elected in 2010, I believe. We're part of the class of 150. We're one of the few people I think left up there from that class. But you have served on House Tax. But I think more importantly today, we talk about you've been the chair for a number of years on the pensions and benefits. I think they call it something else today. What do they call it today? Pensions and insurance. And so when I was there, I didn't get the chance to be chair of a committee like that for the 2 terms that I served in Topeka, but I did get to serve as a vice chairman with Steve in the Pensions and Benefits Committee at that time. And that was probably one of the most difficult committees, I thought, to deal with, because there's just a lot of emotion, a lot of complexity. And what I remember mostly out of that committee was the complexity of retirement programs. And there's so many of them, and they all work differently, and it's just a lot to get your brain around. So I appreciated Steve's leadership because he really did understand it, and I was a little bit lost sometimes, and he would keep us straight. So I consider Steve to be a good friend as well as truly an expert on this topic. So I'm so glad he took time to come from Salina to be with us today. Thank you for both of you for being here today. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. And just for the public and for everybody, we do have we have 2 items this morning, as Tom mentioned, but we do have a hard stop that we want to do at about 10:30-ish. So, all right. So thank you. And again, welcome Alan to the commission meeting, and Steve as well.
Thank you very much, and it is a pleasure to be here. I think I've worked at different levels of state government, as Commissioner Howell mentioned, but I really sort of got my start at the county commission level. My grandfather and my great-grandfather were county commissioners in a county in Nebraska, and so when I'd go and visit him during the summer, I'd get to go to, when I was about 10 years old, get to go to the county commission meeting with him. And so I learned about culverts, and I learned about all kinds of things at that meeting. And I think that was really what sparked my interest in public service and government. So I guess in my mind, here's where it's happened at the county commission level. And so thank you for the public service. I know you're busy and you've got some other items on the agenda, and so we've got a PowerPoint slide, and glad to kind of walk through that at a pretty good clip, but certainly it's your time. I want to be helpful to you and to respond to any questions. As Commissioner Howell mentioned, Representative Stephen Johnson, who was really, he along with Representative Howell helped sort of craft the Capers 3 during that time, where there were lots of changes going on in terms of the Capers system, and I think Representative Johnson has some insights to share along the way. So I mean, that's certainly agreeable with the commission. And so just to get started, just real briefly, of course, Capers only exists for one purpose, and that's to serve our members. So that's what we're all about. Of course, we have 3 retirement systems. We have the Capers system, a police and fire retirement system, and a retirement system for judges. There are over 1,500 employers that are affiliated with Capers, of course, the state, all the counties, all the school districts, all the community colleges, most of the cities. As you probably know, perhaps not the one that has an office across the street here. They have their own retirement system, and they're probably the exception to affiliation with Capers. But then you get into all those other levels of government, townships, drainage districts, fire service protection districts. So 1,500. So Capers touches lots of different levels of government across the state. And of course, we have a board of trustees. Some of these names on this list, it's a 9-member board, serve 4 5-year terms. And you'll see there's 3 from Wichita, Kelly Arnold, who has been a long-serving trustee and has served as chair and done a great job. Lynn Rogers from Wichita, of course, currently the state treasurer, and by virtue of that office, the treasurers on the board of trustees. And then Sam Williams from here in Wichita was just recently appointed by Ty Masterson as, of course, he's president of the Senate. Today I'm got just this little outline, but really when it comes down to it, it's just going to give you a brief overview, talk about Capers 3, and if there's interest in enhancing Capers 3, we'll get to that. So those are the three areas we'll talk about, and again, certainly be pleased to respond to questions along the way if that's helpful. In terms of active membership of Capers, so there's 153,000 members across Kansas that belong to Capers. Now about 24% of that 153,000, or right at 37,000, a little over, belong to that Capers local group. The school group is the largest, is with almost 57%, and over 87,000 members belong to the school group. Local active membership is down about 5%, with about 2,000 fewer active members since 2011, and that's a trend that's really been across almost all of the active groups. And you can see the breakdown there in terms of the Capers 3, which is now the largest group in Capers, a little over 36% belong to Capers 3, and that's, 17,046%, and that'd belong to Capers 3, and that'd be membership since 2015. The next group is Capers 1, about 36%, and then Capers 2, which is membership between 2009 and 2014, is about 17%. Sedgwick County has over 2,000 active Capers members and a little over 500 active KPNF, the police and fire membership. In terms of our retirees, the local group makes up about 21% of all Capers retirees, and there's over 107,000 Capers retirees. Again, as you might expect, the school group's the largest one since they have the largest active. But we have 808 Sedgwick County retirees, and then there's 81 surviving beneficiaries out of that group, and there's 361 retirees on the police and fire side, and 60 beneficiaries there. The average local member is 73 years old, and their benefits about $13,400 a year. The average local retiree exited active employment at age 63, and they had worked for about 19 years. And about 86% of the retirees remain in Kansas. Just in terms of funding, clearly, and those of you that have been, I'm sure, watching the county's money, watching your own money this last fiscal year for the state, so July 1st through June 30th of this year, the Capers Trust Fund had a 26% rate of return. And I wish we could do that every year, but we know that probably will not happen. We have an assumed rate of return of 7.5%, and you can see that graphic there. A little less than half comes from Capers investments in terms of the money in, about a third from employer contributions, and the balance from member contributions. And you can see that annualized total return, and I don't know if Representative Johnson had a comment maybe on that.
And maybe on to the next slide. So, great. And Director Conroy obviously has all of the data down well. And as Commissioner Howell mentioned, these can be really complicated, but I like to break it down to dollars in plus earnings equals dollars out. That equation has to equal over time, and that then was part of what we'll get into as we get into the design of the Tier 3 group. But these returns, and if you look over time, I don't really like the 26% number, just because if you go June to June, you're getting from kind of a low point to a more reasonable point, and I think it overstates what that is. But as you look longer term, the fact that they have hit that 8% over 25 years, I think is useful. But those numbers just change at any moment in time, and that's what makes the snapshot difficult on the previous one. But here, you can see that last return. What I think is really good, and I'll give kudos to the Capers board as well, if you look at a year ago, that lower return, the fact that that wasn't underwater speaks to the consistency and the return in the portfolio. So the return and the risk are both things that have worked very well for the state and the members that are there. So I'll come back a little on reamortization, and I'll let you talk about the funded ratio.
Funding ratio is just, it's a measurement, assets to liabilities. Of course, you want to be 100% funded. There's kind of some threshold. If you're less than 60% funded, then the red lights are flashing and somebody better do something. If you're between 60 and 80%, then you're kind of in that cautionary period, and you really want to be over that 80% hurdle on your way to 100%. And part of that is driven because if the lower the funded ratio, if you have one of those big downturns in the market like in 2008, that'll pull that funded ratio down. And then should you have another one, let's say 3 or 4 years later, it continues to pull that funded ratio down, and at some point it makes it very difficult to sort of invest your way out of that lower funded ratio. But in terms of, so funded ratio, assets to liability, the latest valuation for the overall system, we were at 72.5%. The local funded group was at 76%. And from the low point back in 2012 when Capers 3 and all that came about was about 59.5%. So the local group funded status, of course, partly driven by the good investment earnings, grew 2.4% to get to that 76.11%. The legislature also authorized the sale of pension obligation bonds, just interest arbitrage bonds for the school group, which is of course the largest group, but has the lowest funded ratio. And so those bonds just sold in August at an interest rate of 2.65%, 30-year taxable bonds, and so pretty favorable. So the question is, so Capers got the $500 million. We'll invest it for the next 30 years, and can we out invest? Can we beat that marker of 2.65%? Because if we can do that, then the trust fund's stronger, so the state will be able to put in less contributions over time. So these graphics, funded ratio is headed up. Again, with that bonds, we'd be at 75%. Unfunded liabilities going down. So both of those are moving the right direction. It's still at $8.5 billion with the B for the entire system, but it's going down. And I'll just mention, we'll talk more about amortization period, but that's that mortgage on that unfunded actuarial liability. The legislature back in 1993 set up a 40-year amortization period. So we're about 12 years out from extinguishing that, if that's the ultimate decision by the board and the legislature. So that mortgage is being paid down, 12 years left, and that will be completed at that point. I know amortization policy has been quite a bit of discussion in the legislature, the governor's proposal, the legislature's talked about it, and I think Representative Johnson would like to comment on that.
Thank you, Director. And amortization is just a fun way to start the morning off, so we thought we'd throw that in there. It has been a big topic, and it's been a big topic with the governor and the legislature. Actually, even 2 governors ago, it was a big topic, but the real place it resides is with the Capers Board. They make the amortization decision. Where it gets a little muddy is the legislature sets the actual funding. So there have been several years in the past where the legislature chose not to follow the amortization schedule, and I would caution that we do that at significant risk to the plan and the state when we deviate widely from how that is set. But how it is set is important, and it's important to look at that. And the reason that we went ahead and included that is it's something that we may want to talk about with the local group as well, which has not been engaged in that discussion so far. So the way that pensions are often amortized as you hit a big debt, like they looked in 1992, is on something called a level percent of payroll. And the important piece to that is there's an assumption that your number of employees and your wages will increase, so your payment schedule is on an increasing slope. And that's well and good, but your payments in the early years are less than your interest cost. So you're actually building the debt, growing the ultimate mountain that you pay off in the future under that amortization strategy. The legislature's position has been on the old debt, we would look at something level, but again, it's not our decision, it's the board's, but we have resisted rebuilding that mountain of debt to move it 20 years in the future and have a similar problem to pay off. We felt we wanted to maintain the progress of reducing and eventually eliminating debt, and that is then a discussion we may at some point bring to the local group to say, should we look at re-amortizing the state group? Would we want to do that similarly on the local group? And I'd say that we might. The reason it becomes more critical as we get close to the end, in the last year of the amortization schedule, if we underperform the expected return, which remember is 7.75% that Alan told you, if we only make 6.75%, and there's a 50% chance in a year that we will underperform the average, right? So on a $34 billion liability statewide, so local would be a part of that, if I underperform by 1%, and that's on $34 billion, that's $340 million that I have to come up with in that year. I don't get to, stretch that out over time. I've got a 1-year period remaining. So that amortization schedule can become a problem in those later years, particularly if we had a year like last year where we only got 2%. If you do the math on that, it just whipsaw our budgets across the state and the local group. So we're approaching that window where we want to think about how we appropriately handle that debt going forward so that our budgets are something we can handle, and just wanted to make you aware of that discussion and happy to talk about it further. But that's probably enough for the moment. Thank you.
This would be one of the points, I guess, that I'd hope to be able to leave with you. And if we were going to have a quiz at the end of the presentation, this would be one of the quiz questions. And that's, your Capers benefits are secure and safe. No retiree should worry about not getting their hard-earned retirement benefits that they've earned, they're entitled to, legally entitled to. The trust fund is there, $26 billion. And of course, when you have $26 billion, it's a well-diversified portfolio. We have that 30 to 50 year investment horizon. So we're not day traders. We don't. We do look at the market, but that's not for the faint of heart. And but we have that 30 to 50 year time horizon, and so we know over that time there'll be lots of ups and downs. So our portfolio is well diversified. Of course, equities, bonds, timber, private equity, debt, commercial debt, all of those things that would go into a well-diversified portfolio. And we get about $1 billion a year in employer and employee contributions. So a lot of money's coming in, money's going out, but that trust fund is wrong. So that would be the one thing I sure want to leave with you today, is that the Capers benefits are secure, they will be paid. And so just to quickly, I know we're watching the time here, the cash balance plan. So kind of what was going on, the history in 1993, Representative Johnson mentioned, and he and Commissioner Howell lived that time in terms of trying to come up with a solution. And so I think Representative Johnson will kind of give you the historical perspective of how that unfolded.
Thank you, Director. And yeah, that was the challenge. So we were looking at how we bring it back into balance. At that time, the projected contributions never met the liability problem. So what's the solution? The first piece is to look at bending the growth of the liability. One of the legal questions was, can you change what you already owe? And the answer is no. What we owe, we owe. That's on the books. Alan mentioned it's secure. Capers is a locked box. Once employee dollars, once state dollars are in there, it stays in there. The legislature's role is putting the right amount in, and that's where the legislature has fallen down in getting there. So how do we bring that liability in line as its growth is in the future? Then the other thing was to speed up contributions, and those were increased. Employees stepped in. They increased their contributions. We increased the rate at which we increased the state contribution so we could actually catch it. And finally, in the last 3 years, we have been contributing at and above the actuarially required rate, but we hadn't done that since before 1992. Bringing those pieces in line was really the key as we tried to work through that, and those were the steps to get there. So those pieces, and then if I move to the next one, if that's all right, Alan, mentioned the increase in the contributions and the creation. I apparently advanced too, so I'll see if I can get back to that. The creation of the cash balance plan was the change in that curve, and the key elements that were looked at in that, we looked at a number of plans through that year, and there's no perfect solution. But this was a combination of what the employee groups thought they valued, and that's actually an interesting discussion to go through what they felt that they valued. And many times we'll look at the replacement pieces, but my focus is always on what I don't have. And if I look at where I do still have value in that tier, many employees, we were told, did not actually like taking risk in assets, and having that risk taken somewhere else was of value to them, where the 4% guarantee might actually be attractive as a part of the retirement plan. It's not the total retirement plan. It's other things that would have to happen as well. But that then was the desire, and we'll talk a little more about how that works in some future slides.
This is just a slide that looks at kind of the traditional Capers benefit structure. So, and that's final average salary times years of service times a multiplier, and generally it's 1.85%. So defined benefit plan, if you give me those numbers and you're going to say I'm going to retire, I know what guessing what my salary will be in 20 years. I'm going to work 20 years, I'm going to retire. I can tell you exactly to the dollar what your benefit will be in 20 years, and I guess that's the magic of a defined benefit plan. And so here's just some examples. Capers 1, again, those before 2009, they had a $40,000 annual salary, worked for 20 years. Their benefit would be about $14,200 a year. A 30-year Capers 1 member, same final average salary, but with 30 years, the benefit would be $21,200 a year. And you can see there on the left, they're vested after 5 years, and they have different, between Capers 1 and Capers 2, different sort of normal retirement dates, and I think there's another slide there. But cash balance plan then really has attributes of both a defined benefit and a defined contribution. So from the IRS standpoint, it's still a defined benefit plan, but it has these some attributes of a 401k or defined contribution plans. And so the members, they have an account balance. Like in a defined contribution plan, it's notational and it's kind of hypothetical, so all the assets remain in the trust fund, and they're earning interest on that notational account. The risk, particularly on the upside, on the investment return or lack thereof, the member shares in that. But then there's those attributes of a defined benefit plan, so it's a benefit paid for life. It's guaranteed, so they can never lose what they put in, like in a 401k, I suppose, in some circumstances. And they're guaranteed 4% on their account for their while they're working. And so, of course, the assets are managed and pooled, and the employer contribution is set by the actuary. So this is just kind of a busy graphic, but the members contribute 6%. They earn those retirement credits that I mentioned. They earn that interest. They're vested after 5 years, which means they're entitled to a lifetime benefit when they meet the retirement qualifications. And so all that goes in when they get ready to retire, and we look at what's the account balance in there. So that's why it's like a defined contribution plan. So how much does the individual put in? How much does the employer put in? And then we annuitize or calculate that benefit, and it's converted then to a lifetime benefit. So those employee contributions I mentioned is 4%. They're earning 4% interest, and they're again, the account balance on a Capers 1 and Capers 2 member really doesn't make any difference. It really comes down, what's that final average salary, how many years do they work, and then what's that multiplier. While a Capers 3, then it comes into how much have they put in, how much of their employee has the employer put in, and then there's this additional on the upside, if the investment earnings go over, and there's a calculation there, 5-year average investment return above 6%. But anyway, if it's positive, then the members get to share in that. This slide just looks at employer contributions, and you can see historically for the local Capers employer contributions back in 2014, it was about 9.7%. It's currently in the calendar year 2021 at 8.87 with the latest valuation, and there's a little time lag there. For calendar year 2023, it's going to go down to 8.43%. So there will be a little savings coming your way. You can look forward to that. Maybe the county manager may have some ideas for that reduction in that Capers employer contribution going down to 8.43%. But the employer contribution rate will be, right now is projected to stabilize around that 8.5% rate. And as Representative Johnson mentioned, the local employers have been contributing at the full actuarial contribution rate since 2015, and which is the best thing for full funding. On the employer side, we talked about that 8.9%, should be in that 8% range out to the end of the current unfunded actuarial liability when it's extinguished in 2033. And so that's just, I guess, informational there. This just looks at those employer credits for the employee, and it depends on years of service. And again, there's 4% interest to that notational account of the member, but the longer the individual works, then that annual rate of those pay credits that the employee it gets credited to their individual account goes up, and it gets up to 6% with 24 years of service. Just to note, employer contributions can never be withdrawn unless the person retires. And then finally, just a little graphic here between Capers 2 and 3. Capers 2 and Capers 3 have the same retirement eligibility, so age 60 with 30 years, age 65 with 5 years. There's some early retirement options as young as age 55, but there's an actuarial reduction for that. So the earlier retire, the more the reduction. Capers 1 does have a rule of 85. That's that combination of whenever age and years of service equals 85, regardless of the age of the individual, they can have full retirement. Capers 1 also has age 62 with 10 years, or age 65 with 1. Okay, sure, go.
Thank you, Director. And Alan will finish up talking about how this compares and looking at the income that it replaces, but just to look at some of the pieces of how Tier 3 works and some things to think about going forward. it's not set in stone. And this one is different. The challenge we had with tiers 1 and 2 is we had guaranteed at that time an 8% return on those assets at every moment in time from the time an employee entered until they exited the system. That was an enormous risk. In this plan, there is a 4% guarantee, not phenomenal, but pretty good in today's world if I'm looking for a guarantee, but that's not set in stone. It's absolutely there. If I have earned it, it's on the books, I've got it. But if the market conditions don't support that in the future, it is something that can be changed. The formula is something that we can change. So that payout of 75% of the return over 6%, I don't know if that's going to be the right formula over time. It may be too weak. We may have the chance to increase that for the benefit of employee payouts. We'll have to continue to see how it works. We have just hit the point where we have a 5-year history, so that is paid out on a 5-year history. The good news for employees, and it's based on calendar year rather than fiscal year returns, which is also important. The calendar year return for last year was 11.5%. You saw on an earlier slide. For the previous year, it was 17%. This year doesn't look too bad so far, but we'll see where that comes. If those numbers are in a 5-year average, that's going to drive a reasonable addition to those accounts going forward, and that's the goal for how that might work, but it is variable. If we get the return, it is shared in the employee's accounts. If we don't, it is not, and that's part of the affordability and part of what makes it work, but it is something that we would continue to look at going forward to see what can be done and what can be sustained by the plan and the returns. So thanks for your consideration.
Then just spend a minute or two on, it's called replacement ratios, and so that just looks at an individual's in terms of retirement benefit to salary, and so we have a comparison of CAPERS 2 to CAPERS 3, so the cash balance plans, and of course, these are all projections and estimates, but certainly the timing, particularly in CAPERS 3, the timing of employment plays a role in those estimated benefits, because the longer the system has those contributions or that money in that notational account, then the longer it's invested, the longest the individual's interest or account will grow. And so in general, the traditional defined benefit plan, CAPERS 2, is expected to provide a higher benefit than the cash balance plan for career employees. It gets closer, again, in early and mid-career members because of that power of compound interest. And this just shows a graphic, lots of bars here, but the orange one is CAPERS 2. The blue one is CAPERS 3 with only the guaranteed 4%, and then the green bar is CAPERS 3, but plus that additional dividend. You assume the investment earnings are going to be there above the threshold, and it assumes over time it's 6.25%. So that CAPERS 3 replacement ratio. So in that first example there to the far left, a career employee that was there from 35 to 65, had 30 years of service, his CAPERS 2 benefit would replace 51% of his income. A CAPERS 3 member, same years and of service, age and service, it would be about 38%. And then without those additional dividend payments, it'd be about 27%. And you can see the difference. And of course, CAPERS is designed to be in conjunction with Social Security. And so it's CAPERS benefit, Social Security, and then personal savings, which is really the next slide. And the retirement experts say you should, in terms of having an adequate retirement benefit, you should look for about a goal of about replacing at least 80% of income through retirement. The point we make is CAPERS and Social Security won't be enough, so employees need to save on their own. And one example, of course, is a deferred compensation plan, and clearly there's lots of other mechanisms out there for people to save, but that's one. And I just mentioned there is an avenue for those employers that want to make additional contributions that are affiliated with Capers. And of course, we have a Capers 457 plan, and about 400 employers public employers across the state also are affiliated through our Capers 457 plan. It's a separate trust fund. It has over about $1.5 billion in it. It's all basically all employee money. But there's also then another avenue. It's called a 401A, which the employer, it can be structured where the employer can make additional contributions on behalf of an employee into this 401A plan. There's no cost to the employer. Again, it's like the deferred comp program. And Capers 457 uses Empower as our third-party administrator. I know Sedgwick County also uses Empower. I mean, you're not affiliated with Capers 457, but we share the same third-party administrator, which happens to be Empower. And so there is a mechanism there. I just mentioned that if employers, I guess, want to enhance the Capers 3 contributions, could be made through a 401A, as it's called, and just mention that. And so those, I guess, those additional contributions, of course, hopefully would improve recruitment and retention, improve workforce management, would provide some supplemental retirement benefits, and help those employees on their way to retirement readiness, which is, and so on a 401A, there's different employer contribution limits there. It can be up to $58,000 a year for employee and employee contributions in a 401A. 401A also does not pay FICA tax on those contributions, so it gives some flexibility there in terms of trying to I guess, enhance retirement readiness for public employees. So anyway, lots of information, lots of detail. I appreciate your attention. Again, just trying to leave with you those 3 points. Capers is secure. The trust fund's sustainable. It will be there in the future. Capers 3 is a shared risk plan. Still technically a defined benefit plan, but it has attributes of a defined contribution plan. And then there are avenues, and one I mentioned is this 401A out there in terms of employers, public employers that would like to maybe do some additional enhancements for their staff. And I don't know if there's anything else. So anyway, glad to be here. Appreciate your public service, and certainly be pleased to respond to any questions. Although if it's on Capers 3, Commissioner Howell and Representative Johnson were really the architects, so I'd turn to them, but glad I'd give it a shot.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Conroy. Commissioner Howell?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Director, for the presentation. I would just reflect on one thing, that is, I did get to vote on House Bill 2032 in 2012, but I wasn't actually on the committee yet. So there was lots of debate happening, in the under the dome there about what to do, and certainly something had to happen. But unfortunately, or more fortunately, how you want to look at that, I wasn't the architect, but there were some smart people there that figured out that. But now that we're down the road quite a ways, getting close to a decade here, we're seeing how that has worked, and so. I think the high point of House Bill 2032 in 2012 was that we would reach, if you will, actuarial salt. The unfunded liability would be under control in 2032. Is that correct?
That's correct.
What was that percentage? We're trying to hit like what, 85% or so?
Well, we're trying to get at least over 80%. Back in 2012, the system-wide, it was 56%.
Right.
So it was in that very difficult spot. And so a lot of heavy lifting by policymakers, legislature, and so we've improved the funding, some bonds, some increased employer contributions, really for the state paying that actuarially required amount, which locals have done since 2015. The state, unfortunately, had not done it for about 25 years on state and school.
And so with the 4 sectors of Capers being KP&F, the judges, the state or local employers, if you will, and what am I missing?
Schools.
Yeah. Between those 4, KP&F and judges have always been fairly in good shape. They've never really had a problem. the state and local has been, I guess, challenged, but especially the schools came in the early 1970s, and what was their percentage of?
It was, in the early 70s, and kind of what we say, the school group at that time, the old teachers' retirement system was basically a pay-as-you-go system. So, and it was structured like Social Security, nothing wrong with Social Security, but the structure was you bring in your current money, and that's what you send right out to pay benefits. While CAPERS is, those assets are accumulated, and out of the assets, you pay those benefits. So to answer your question, though, the school group really didn't bring any assets. When they were merged with CAPERS, they just brought liability.
And they are the largest part of CAPERS.
They are.
So it has been a challenge for a long time, and so I think we're seeing some great leadership to get us into a better position. One of the challenges, I think, for local government is, and you already mentioned it, is recruitment and retention. And this is a benefit that our employees absolutely need, and needs to be competitive with the private sector. And so with that, what we've seen in the private sector since even 2012 is there's been a huge change in the private sector, going from defined benefit plans to cash balance plans, like 401ks, for example. And so I know that CAPERS 3, we use the word hybrid. It's kind of between the two. Mm-hmm. It's invested like a pension program. There's some differences. At the end of when the employee chooses to retire, they have, if you will, a savings account that's got their name on it, so to speak. You said it's not technically money that's set aside with their name on it. That's not the way it really works. But on paper, I should say, as an account, there is so much money that belongs to that employee. And that would be, again, assuming they retire, their employer contributions, plus their personal contributions, plus any interest earned. So they get to actually keep the interest on their actual investments.
That is correct.
So if they get the 26% or 2% or whatever the number would be, they get that in their account.
There's a guaranteed 4%, and then the investment earnings, like the 26%, ultimately calculates into some extra dividend.
So what confuses me a little bit is how does CAPERS 3 benefit the state and its unfunded liability for CAPERS 1 and 2?
The cost, and it really is, as you look forward, the normal cost is what it's called. So what's the normal cost, the retirement cost for those people that are currently actively working? Not any of that debt that happened back in the 1990s or 2000s. What's that active? And the cost for CAPERS 3 is less than, for the normal cost as it is, it's less than 2%. And the employees are putting in 6%. But then, of course, the employer is also paying then that lug on the debt from previous things. So as the debt goes down, then that employer contribution rate eventually will go down too. And of course, you go out to 2033 and the mortgage is paid off, it would drop down to, let's say, 2% in that time. Just because it sounds confusing to me, that 6% though is still technically all of their money. They don't give up anything. That's
Everything
correct.
they put in, you get it all. And you did make a comment if someone doesn't actually retire. So if, say, someone was to withdraw their funds, they could do that.
Yes.
They would give up their employer contributions when they did that.
That-
And they would roll it over to hopefully some type of retirement program, otherwise they might become taxable, right?
That's correct.
So they have those options of essentially pulling money and rolling it over wherever they want to. They could retire. They could also just die. And if they die, what happens to the employer contributions?
Then, depending on where they are, if they're beneficiary, if they're eligible for retirement, then their beneficiary would receive a benefit. If they unfortunately die maybe after, at a pretty young age, of course, there's some death benefits, but then their beneficiaries would always get then what the member put in plus interest.
But no employer contributions.
But no employer contributions. Only if the member was retirement eligible at the time of their death, then there's some mechanisms that the beneficiaries could get a lifetime benefit based, and they would get those employer contributions at that point.
There's a few other questions. I have another other people may have questions as well, but I'm curious, is the working after retirement still being debated? We still haven't solved that problem.
Still being discussed. That's right. The legislature wrestled with it for several years, and currently, and it's of course to try to keep us square with the IRS. They want to make sure that there's a true separation of retirement, that there's no prearrangement, that somebody doesn't retire one day and come back to work the next day, get their retirement benefit, get their salary, and our friends at the IRS say that's not a true retirement, and so they don't allow that. It put the jeopardy of the Capers plan, the tax status of the Capers plan in jeopardy if that goes on. But there's still, it seems like it has, I know it's still an issue because somebody who comes back to work and they earn more than $25,000 in a calendar year, that employer contribution rate jumps up to 30% for that amount over $25,000. So clearly it's a decision point for the employer to re-engage that retired employee.
Yeah, because it limits our ability to recruit people we know have the experience. They may want to come back, but they don't. But they're restricted by the law. So it's a challenge for us to get some people to come back. But I have two more questions, Chairman, if you don't mind. I just ask two, and I'll try to be done. But I guess I would encourage the legislature, again, Capers 3, I think there's pros and cons. I don't know if you agree with that or not, but I think there's pros and cons of these various plans. A lot of the private sector has moved into the cash value plan, like 401k or 457. I would just say to be competitive with the private market, private sector, it might be a good thing, and I don't know if the state would even consider this option or not, but it might be a good thing for a local employer, number one, to allow new employees a selection as they come on board, to opt out, if you will, of a Capers program and to essentially move into one of these other cash value plans with employer benefits. And one of the benefits I can see right off the bat would be they would have immediate vesting. They would get to retain the employer benefits. They would have more control over how much risk they take and how those things are invested. And again, they would see this essentially be, I would say this is much more competitive with what's happening in the private market, so a private sector. And so I would just like to see the legislature, number one, give us, as an employer, an option for new employees to do that if they want to. If they don't want to participate in Capers, give them the option of not participating in Capers. And as long as they belong to a plan, and the employer would be equally committed to that plan, whatever that would be. You said we can't give to a 457, we can't to a 401, that's what you said. So maybe they would have the option of an employer-funded employer participation in a 401k plan, 401a, I guess it should be. Would the legislature be willing to consider that option for us?
Yes, I think currently local employers, and depending on the provisions you have with your own deferred comp provider, but like through the state Capers 457, an employer can establish, and I don't know, maybe about 20 have so far established a 401a plan for their for contributions for their employees under the umbrella of the Capers 457 plan, and you may have that flexibility with your.
They still have to participate in Capers 3 for new employees. They're still obligated to Capers 3.
That's correct.
I would like to give them the option of not participating in Capers 3 if they don't want to do that.
Right, and clearly other states, other public plans have gone that route of giving options to new employees affiliate with this state retirement plan or some type of like a 401k. The challenge probably in some ways comes down to because there's still this big debt to pay, so the employers would still be on the hook for paying that. And then whatever they might do for a new 401k, so let's say if the employees put in 6 and the employer puts in 4 or 6, that's going to be on top of, at least for this transition period, for probably several decades, the cost to local employers would go up because of that. Because still paying on the old debt and then I think making a viable plan, a new, like a 401k plan.
In terms of recruitment and retention, though, I think we'd like to have the option. Mm-hmm. And I think that ought to be a local decision. If we want to do that, we ought to have that option. Yeah. We know that a lot of the folks entering the workforce in 2021, they're not viewing this as a career that they want to be here for 30, 40 years. They want to be here for 2 or 3, 4 or 5 years. And so the idea of vesting and having to stay there long enough to get the employer contribution is not really a pull. I mean, and essentially we're using that employee to deal with a problem that we actually have on our own shoulders. And so I see this as our problem already, I don't want to put that burden on a new employee. I would like to give them the freedom to say, we want to compete with the private sector. So again, I see reasons we would do that. And then along that line, again, you're not going to like this, but because we have employees who are already in Capers 3, I'd like to, again, essentially find a way to transition people out if they choose to want to come out of Capers 3 without giving up their employer benefit. It'd be nice to be able to say, over some period of time, we can transition somebody out of Capers 3 if they don't want to be a part of it. So again, I just want to say that Capers 3 as an employer is a bit of it's causing us to be not competitive with the private market, and that's my number one challenge here. I think that state did what they had to do, but it's not helping us recruit employees, and that's my biggest concern. Thank you.
If I may just follow up, I think you're right. I mean, other state plans, again, I think Oklahoma, other ones have allowed options for existing employees to go, in a different direction. So I think presumably all that can be navigated through the IRS and get through all their hurdles. So, I mean, that would ultimately be an option. I think, too, I guess maybe I'm a bit of an optimist, but I think back to when Capers started in 1961, the retirement benefit there was perhaps pretty modest, but of course over decades, and the wheels turned slow, that retirement benefit for Capers 1 and Capers 2 certainly improved. And I guess I'm thinking too, over time, for those people that think Capers 3, the retirement benefit is not where they want it to be, over time, there will be changes to enhance that, to make it, the benefit more enticing, I guess.
Commissioner Dennis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just so that I'm clear, and follow up on Commissioner Howell's last question. Now, in Sedgwick County, we have employers under Capers 1, Capers 2, and Capers 3. And I do care about the ones that are coming in, because we do have to recruit them. But we also have to protect those employees that we've got that are in Capers 1 and 2. So to follow up on his question, if we gave them an option to opt out of Capers 3 for new employees, what's that going to do with our employees that are in Capers 1 and 2?
Yeah, great question. And the short answer is more than likely then, because that flow of so there's less members coming in, less contributions coming in, you still have that obligation. So more than likely the employer contribution on the existing system would go up. Because again, you still have that obligation, like you mentioned. So it'd probably increase.
Thank you. I appreciate that answer.
Okay, I don't see any other questions at this time. Again, thank you. There's a lot to unpack. Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
Thank you. And I don't know,
Yeah.
we may be well into the minutes of your next topic, so I don't want to go too long.
That's right.
All of these things are so interrelated. Each point hits a number of others. So back to the super simple stuff, dollars in plus the net of what you earn equals dollars out. So as we look at the different plans, a number are options, and there's not one right answer. So that's the good news. We can keep working together, and we can make it better over time on whatever our key priorities are that we need to. If it is, so in 1992, one of the key priorities was to help reduce the number of employees, and we did that at some expense to Capers by adding the 85-point rule so people could retire earlier. That turned out to be a fairly expensive decision to meet an objective. So we want to make sure we tie them all together. So one of the things that also gets really interrelated in the plans. So one of the questions that you had asked is, how does this help reduce the cost overall? And it relates also to the question of how do I protect 1 and 2? If, let's just take one example, I went to a defined contribution plan for new employees, and I left the existing portfolio just as it is to meet what we have. Not only does it create some of those challenges, but you shift the portfolio from a pension portfolio, which is one of the longest term portfolios I've ever worked with in private sector or public, to an insurance portfolio. And if you're familiar with an insurance general fund, I now have a bunch of folks with a finite time frame. And I moved to a portfolio which today might earn 2 3/4% in a fixed income portfolio from that pension portfolio that you saw the returns on. You would change the nature of that pool. So one of the things that was a consideration in the design is there a win? It has to be a win for the employees too, that allows us to continue a pension portfolio in that overall design. The cost to that would be significant. Each 0.25% we reduce our expected return is like $1 billion in liability. So that's a fairly big deal that you want to just keep in balance. So one of the ideas I like then is the choice. So I'll talk to Alan more about other states that have done that, because I know we are still waiting on an IRS election that we asked for in 2012 to be able to have a choice, which may be different than some of these that we could have. But I don't know that I could promise to deliver it, say, in the next legislative session, although the choice has always intrigued me and is a part of one of the initial designs. And another thing that is a little different, so my previous work was in building plans and doing the stuff in the private sector. And some of you may recall when Delta Airlines went bankrupt, we had a number of pilots that were clients that we thought were fine forever, and the pension was just gone. I would submit that a pension in the private sector and the public sector is different in that I'm not willing to go on the line and say that my business or GE or whoever will be here in 100 years, but I think Sedgwick County will be. I think Kansas will be, and that can allow us a different way to have a design. So then measuring the utility, or measuring how much employees value a benefit, I am different than the majority of our state employees in that I want my 401. That is my retirement plan. That's how I think about it. But the guarantee may be of value to some, and that's where I think your choice plan has a lot of value to introduce the best of both worlds and allow us to be more competitive for that employee that really is looking at the private sector that we need to hire right here. So thank you for the points.
And Commissioner Howell?
Thank you. So again, I'd like to continue to work with you on this, Representative Johnson. I think this is a really important point for local government. And if there was a way for someone to transition in or out of Capers 3 after they take a position, and, maybe they decide they do want to make it a career, but they said they did opt out and they want to, I would like to just work with those employees and give them options. I think the options is the key. For us to have options, I think is how we market us as a good employer for that employee. And I don't want to get too political here. I do want to ask one question. There's been a proposal out there to borrow money from Capers. We hear that word, re-amortize, if you will, remortgage some Capers, unfunded, not to borrow the $1 billion, not that plan. But the governor has talked about doing something with Capers, borrowing some money out of Capers, and then I'm not sure exactly what she's talking about. Can you please explain what's being proposed and what exactly is that and how that impacts this entire program?
What I think it would be was the reamortization proposal that has been brought for the last several years, which is just, again, we would want to do it at some point, but the method of reamortization is what the legislature has pushed back against, and that is what has brought up an additional set of billions of dollars in the liability as you play that out in the future. Reamortizing on the methods that were proposed didn't take money out of the trust fund, but it reduced what we were putting in between $150 million to $200 million right now. The challenge is that bigger reduction with the 7 3/4 interest working against us. Once we're not paying the full interest cost and allowing that to compound against us is what builds the billions. I think the last one was around $4 billion in total dollars over time. Now that's over time, that's not the present value, but that's where it may have been connected between not borrowing from directly, but by not making our payment, we are increasing the amount we borrow.
I think that makes sense. By lowering the amount of money paid into the unfunded liability, the catch-up payment, so to speak,
it rebuilds the mountain of debt
right,
by compounding against us.
And then, of course, that extra, by pushing off the payoff, it adds interest cost. Which okay.
Right, quickly.
That makes sense. All right, well, thank you for explaining that. I appreciate you taking time to come to Sedgwick County. It's really great to have you here. Thank you.
Okay. Steve and Alan, thanks again. Don't see any other comments, so appreciate it. Okay, Tom, next item, please.
Chairman, the next topic is we're going to discuss Tyler Technologies. The Eagle ran a story a week or two ago about some difficulties that the state of Kansas was having with Tyler Technologies and their contract. Sedgwick County currently has two projects ongoing with Tyler. One is the CAD RMS JMS update, of which Tyler is the vendor on that. And then, of course, we're also associated with the Odyssey project that is being run by the state of Kansas. Greg Gann I think will take the podium here and kind of give an overview on the CAD, RMS, JMS adoption. I don't think we have a problem there, and Elena is here as well from 911. And then we can talk about Odyssey as well, and we have members of the sheriff and the DA here to discuss that as well. So Greg, if you can give us an overview to start the discussion.
Thank you, Tom.
Good morning, Greg.
Good morning. Greg Gann, IT Business Solutions Group Director, and I'm also the lead project manager for the CAD, RMS, JMS, computer-aided dispatch, records management system, jail management system for emergency communications and the sheriff's office. To date, the project is on schedule. Our teams are hard at work at configuring essential components and participating in regular trainings. The executive team, which I'm a member of, meets weekly with Tyler. Our dialogue is not limited to those status meetings. We feel that has been productive and they are a willing partner, and we've been satisfied with their work to date. The level of support provided is keeping us on schedule to deliver our target completion date of May of 22. As far as how Odyssey, the state's court case management system to replace full court, originally we began this project, the Odyssey project was to have been completed for Sedgwick County by this date. They have run into complications, and they have asked for a full stop of work until those issues can be resolved. My partner at the state, Kelly O'Brien, he's the Chief Information Technology Officer for the Office of Judicial Administration. He and I are in regular communications. He feels much the same as we do about the interaction with Tyler. He's pleased with their work. He's not displeased. Those were his words. He's asked hard questions. He said, can we function if we turn Odyssey on for the courts of volume? Can data come out of Odyssey that is useful? At this time, no. It's not up to the standards of the Kansas courts or OJIA. It certainly cannot supply the information that we get currently out of full court for Sedgwick County. So what does all this mean for Sedgwick County? Well, the two are now kind of hand in hand in a path going down the road. We're going to go live with CAD, RMS, JMS in May of 22. That means the jail management side has got to have a solution that was originally going to be provided by Odyssey before our live date. Sedgwick County IT is prepared and has the capacity to provide that data to that system. We are engaged with Tyler in those discussions and working towards that goal so that we do not miss our deadline of May of 22. In the meantime, full court remains up. It's still providing all the information that it has to date and will continue to do so. And we feel that we won't have any complications in that. And my partners from Sheriff, DA, and Emergency Communications are here, and I'll stand for questions.
Okay, are there any questions so far? I don't see any. Thanks for the explanation. Good to hear that it's on time and on schedule. And
Thank you.
on budget, did you say that too?
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right. Anything else on that?
No, I think that's it.
Okay, well,
No
thanks for
questions for
clarifying that, because there was some confusion among a little bit of the public and the law enforcement and the court system. So that's good. And that is the end of
That's correct. That's all.
the staff meeting?
Correct.
Okay. All right. With that, we will adjourn until tomorrow morning. Thank you, everybody, again for your attendance.